on bringing Australians home, as we have been doing all year, but particularly since September. We have to make sure absolutely that our hotel quarantine system is the very best it can be. I particularly say that we've been discussing that matter in great detail in the Australian Health Protection Principal Committee meetings last week, as well as in National Cabinet yesterday, where we really looked at what are the things we can do to absolutely make sure that the quarantine system we have in Australia, that 14-day quarantine in hotels, which has kept Australia safe and got us to this situation we have today in terms of community transmission, is as good as it can be, learning from the review of Jane Holton, as well as the Coates inquiry in Victoria, as well as our own experience all around Australia in doing this over many months. And so that is in place. I have all confidence in the Victorian system now that that's been revamped and they've restarted taking international flights from countries that require hotel quarantine this week. And they have now their first cases, as we would expect, for people coming from countries with high incidence right now. They've had positive cases in hotel quarantine overnight. So we have all of the new cases that have been diagnosed in Australia in the last 24 hours are indeed in hotel quarantine. The other point I'd like to make as we transition into a new and very exciting time, just in the last hour, we've had confirmation that the US FDA, their drug regulator in the US, has granted a emergency use authorization for the Pfizer vaccine. We have Pfizer as one of our vaccines that is on order to come to Australia next year, and we'll be indeed going through the full regulatory process through our own world-class regulator, the Therapeutic Goods Administration. So quite a different situation in the UK, in Canada, and now in the US in terms of what's happening with the pandemic and their need, their emergency in fact, to have vaccine available to the population, and starting with priority groups, just as we are planning to do so in Australia with that vaccine. But just to stress, this is not full approval that the FDA has given, neither has the UK, neither has Canada. These are emergency use authorisations to allow the vaccine to roll out. Also overnight, and this is part of the reason why the FDA is confident to give that authorisation, in the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the premier journals, medical journals in the world, Pfizer has reported on their phase 3 trial results, their interim results, and it's very encouraging. We've heard some of the headlines before, but there's more detail now than we've heard before from the company itself. It's peer-reviewed scientific literature, and that's how we move forward with the scientific expertise. So 95% effective in old people and young people, effective in healthy people and people with chronic disease, and a very good safety profile. So these are interim results. We'll get more detail, and much more detail will come to the Therapeutic Goods Administration to allow them to make their own independent assessment of these matters and give us regulatory approval and that confidence that we absolutely need for any new vaccine, that it is safe and effective. So I'll go. I have some questions on the phone. Go ahead.
Oh, hi, Professor Kelly. Steph Jarzelki from ABC News. If the TGA does approve the Pfizer vaccine, we've only secured 10 million doses of it. How easily will we be able to secure additional doses? Where will we be in the queue?
So all throughout our proposal, our strategy of this vaccination, we've looked at a diversified portfolio. That's been important. Pfizer has been part of that portfolio and continues to be. We've made a pre-purchasing agreement for 10 million doses, but we are certainly talking to Pfizer very frequently about the possibility of arranging more doses if that was needed. We're also looking very closely. at all of the candidates that are out there. So at the moment, we're in the very fortunate position of having onshore manufacture of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Again, a very well advanced and very hopeful looking vaccine for both safety and efficacy. It works and it's safe. And it's being manufactured in Australia. We're one of only 20 countries in the world that has onshore manufacturing, and that AZ vaccine is being manufactured right now in the CSL plant in Melbourne. Pfizer will be part of that as well. Again, very promising results, and subject to that regulatory approval, we will have those vaccines, and they've guaranteed that they will arrive in the early part of next year, the first doses of Pfizer. And then we have also a protein vaccine in the Novavax, which we've secured this week, extra doses, extra 11 million doses of that Novavax vaccine. So we have a diversified portfolio, and we'll be able to use that as that goes forward, subject to the regulatory approval of the TGA. I think the Sydney Morning Herald's online, or Channel 10. Someone else is there. Is there another question?
I have more
questions, sorry.
Professor Kelly, if there's no one else jumped in.
Go ahead.
So just to clarify, why didn't the government decide to purchase additional doses of Pfizer, and why did it decide to purchase additional doses of the Novavax and the AstraZeneca Oxford University vaccines? Can you explain that?
So we have a range of advanced purchasing agreements with all three of those companies that you've mentioned. The AstraZeneca vaccine, we have that being manufactured in the CSL plant in Melbourne. So that's onshore vaccines. They're here. It's relatively easy to scale up and to continue to make more of those. So that was certainly our first choice. The Novavax, we felt it was important, as we unfortunately have lost the UQ option yesterday for reasons that have been explained in great detail in the last couple of days since yesterday, so I won't go further into that. But it's important to have that protein option, so we went with the Novavax. The Pfizer, we're in discussions with them. We're in discussions with many other manufacturers as well, but that's what we've done at the moment. We felt it was important to secure that amount of vaccine for now, and we've gone with those three candidates, 3 out of the 4 that we had in our original tranche. And there is someone else online.
Yes, Katina from the Fairfax Papers.
Hi, Katina. Go ahead.
Just wondering, perhaps twofold. Sorry if you addressed this in your opening remarks. I didn't hear them. But does the American decision to have an emergency approval of the Pfizer vaccine make any difference to Australia's timetable, or is it similar with the UK? It doesn't change our plans. And yes, I'll ask my second question after. Yeah,
sure. I did cover that. Apologies, I think you were on mute. But yes, so just to be clear that the US FDA decision in the last hour is indeed an emergency use authorisation. It's not a full regulatory approval, and that's very similar to what's happened in the UK and indeed Canada over the last week or so. So, of course, seeing our colleagues, our well-respected colleagues overseas making those decisions is supportive, but we will be doing our own full regulatory approval in a fast-tracked way, but in a very careful and methodical way, as we expect of our world-class regulator, the TGA, in the coming weeks.
And secondly, just regarding the numbers today out of Victoria, are you satisfied with the Victorian hotel quarantine arrangements now, and do you think they've got the right systems in place to contain the virus within that hotel quarantine system?
So the hotel quarantine is a very important part of our controls because of the large outbreak that's happening, or the pandemic that's happening around the globe, and many of our Australians that we're bringing home are coming from countries that have a very large burden of disease at the moment, the UK, parts of Europe, the US, India and other places. So very important that we have that 14 days of hotel quarantine, that it's run efficiently and effectively, I'm very secure with what's happened in terms of restarting that system in Victoria. We've had many discussions at AHPPC with Brett Sutton and others in relation to the Victorian system, and they've really looked into this very carefully. And I think we can all learn from their own experience about that. What I will say, though, of course, is that this is a very infectious virus. We've seen how easily it can spread out of quarantine, and so absolutely being as careful as possible is important, and our Victorian colleagues are definitely doing that.
Professor Kelly, I've got some questions for the Channel 10 journalist. Her line cut out. Her questions are, firstly, what's your response to the 5 former Prime Ministers saying that they are happy to get the vaccine when it's approved? Do you welcome that?
Well, I certainly welcome any support that comes from prominent Australians in support of the vaccine, and I would also be queuing up to take one of these vaccines once that regulatory approval comes through. Whether the 5 former Prime Ministers are actually in our priority groups would be something we would have to consider, and we do have very clear advice from ATAGI, our peak advisory group on immunisation, who have looked at this very carefully. And so just to remind people about what those priority groups are: people at highest risk of getting the disease, those at highest risk of being exposed to the disease, and then frontline workers that are absolutely crucial to keep our society and economy going. They're our 3 priority groups in the first tranche. So former Prime Ministers, we'd have to look at that as a particular group.
In terms of emergency approval, as we've seen in the US and UK, what would it take for Australia to dip into emergency use of the Pfizer vaccine? Is that something that's a reality here?
Well, the reality is we haven't had a single community case in 8 days. We've had very few cases in the community over the last month or so, other than that short outbreak, important one that was controlled very quickly in South Australia. So we do not have an emergency at the moment. We can afford to wait and go through the processes as we would normally do in terms of regulating a new therapeutic good, in this case a vaccine. So we won't be rushing into that. I have full confidence in what has happened to improve and enhance and learn from our experiences in relation to contact tracing around Australia. The testing capability that we have in Australia has enormous capacity now and ability to respond when needed, as we saw in South Australia a few weeks ago. And our isolation and quarantine is world quality. So we've got all of those things in place. We have no community cases at the moment anywhere in Australia. And so vaccine is important, but next year is when we'll be looking at that.
And also from Channel 10, in terms of the UQ vaccine, did Australia back the wrong horse?
Look, the UQ story has been talked through a lot in the last 24 hours. I won't go over it in great detail, only to say that this was a very innovative and encouraging and important breakthrough in the science of how vaccines can be made. It was a local product, and we want to really support our researchers and research and development here in Australia in many ways, but this was a particularly good opportunity. They were at the start of this year ahead of the game, because they had actually done a lot of this sort of work looking at vaccine development in general, and then shifted that into the COVID space. And their results of their phase 1 clinical trials were very positive in terms of showing that it works to make immunity, and also very safe. But unfortunately, there was the issue that was addressed yesterday about interfering with HIV tests results, and because of that, it's not right to continue. if that had been the only vaccine in the world that had been developed to the point where that UQ vaccine had so rapidly been developed this year here in Australia, then we may have had a different decision. But because we are so well prepared with alternatives that don't have that sort of issue, that was why that decision was made.
Professor Kelly, can I ask another question if there's no one else waiting?
Go ahead. Yep.
Any other questions? Just on the Pfizer, when you say you're in discussions about securing additional doses, the Wall Street Journal has an article where Pfizer's saying they can only produce 50 million doses this year. They're constrained by manufacturing and demand from around the world. How difficult will it be for Australia, or how difficult has it been during negotiations to secure those additional doses with Pfizer? Is that part of the reason why we only have 10 million doses on the table at the moment?
So we don't need any vaccine this year. Obviously, there are countries that are in a far different state to us, and they should be prioritised. We've had discussions with Pfizer. They believe that this is a short-term problem, and they're on track to develop billions of doses next year, and we're for some of those. The major advantage of the RNA technology that's used in the Pfizer vaccine is that it's an extremely small dose that is needed, and so consequently, a large amount of vaccine can be made very quickly. This is the major breakthrough that we've got in the RNA vaccines. There are some downsides, though. We know that particular vaccine needs to be kept at -70, which is a very cold and very different from the usual cold chain that we need for safe vaccine logistics and delivery. So Pfizer has issues from that point of view in the Australian context, but we are sure, and this has been part of our contract negotiations with Pfizer, that they will have that logistic part from place of production to place of administration of the actual vaccine covered in terms of safety and quality. But yes, it is an issue. We don't have mRNA vaccine production capability here in Australia right now. We're looking into that. But what we do have is an ability to make protein vaccines. We have an ability to make the viral vector vaccine, which is the Oxford AstraZeneca product, and so we're moving ahead with those.
When you say you're looking into mRNA vaccine production, would that come out of CSL, or have those talks not occurred yet?
It's at its very early stages of exploring how that capability might be able to be developed here in Australia, but that's just a theoretical thing at the moment. Are there any other questions? No. Thank you very much.